The sky above Seoul turned black at 3:47 in the afternoon. Captain Yuna stood at the window of Lunar Base Gwangyo, watching through the long-range cameras as massive shapes blocked out the sun over Earth. The ships were enormous. Each one was larger than a city. They hung in the atmosphere like dark gods looking down at insects. "What are they?" Private Taiwu asked. He was young, barely 22, with soft eyes that had never seen real war. He had joined the military to pay for his mother's medical bills. Now he stood frozen, staring at the screens. Yuna did not answer. She had no answer. In all of humanity's history, they had never made contact with alien life. Now, without warning, without greeting, without any chance to speak, the aliens had come. The first beam of light hit Seoul. Yuna watched her home city vanish in white fire. One moment, there were buildings and streets and millions of people. The next moment, there was only glass and ash. The beam lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds to erase everything she had ever known. She did not scream. She did not cry. Something inside her simply went cold and hard, like iron cooling in water. Across Earth, the same thing was happening. Tokyo, New York, London, Mumbai, Beijing. One by one, the great cities of humanity were erased. The aliens did not land. They did not demand surrender. They did not even speak. They simply killed. Admiral Jisu's voice crackled over the emergency channel. She was aboard the carrier Baekdu, the largest ship in humanity's fleet. Her voice was steady, but Yuna could hear the weight of death in every word. "All units, this is Admiral Jisu. Earth's defense grid is gone. Repeat, the grid is gone. All surviving vessels are ordered to retreat to Rally Point 7 in the asteroid belt. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. We cannot win this fight." Yuna looked around the lunar base. There were maybe 200 people here. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, families. She saw children holding their parents' hands, too young to understand why the adults were crying. "Captain," Taiwu said, his voice shaking. "My mother was in Bizen. Do you think Bizen is gone?" Yuna said quietly. She had seen the flash on the cameras. "I'm sorry, Taiwu." The young medic's face crumpled. He leaned against the wall and slid down to the floor, his rifle falling from his hands. Yuna wanted to comfort him. She wanted to tell him everything would be okay. But she would not lie. Nothing would ever be okay again. The next 72 hours were the longest of human history. The alien ships moved across Earth like farmers harvesting wheat. They burned every city. They destroyed every military base. They melted every satellite and space station that tried to flee. Yuna organized the evacuation of the lunar base. They could not stay here. The moon was too obvious, too easy to find. She loaded the survivors onto 3 transport ships and flew toward Mars, staying low, staying quiet, hoping the aliens would not notice them. They almost made it. A single alien fighter appeared behind them as they passed the orbit of the moon. It was small, fast, and shaped like a blade. Yuna watched it approach on the radar, her heart pounding. "Everyone hold on," she said calmly. She flew the transport into a debris field from a destroyed satellite. The alien fighter followed. Yuna waited until it was close, then cut the engines and let the transport spin. The fighter shot past them, confused by the sudden change. In that moment of confusion, Yuna fired everything she had. The fighter exploded. Taiwu stared at her with wide eyes. "You killed it." "They can die," Yuna said. "That's all I needed to know." They reached Mars 3 days later. The underground colony there had survived because the aliens had not yet reached it. But the survivors there had heard the news. Earth was gone. 7 billion people were dead. The aliens had broadcast a single message to the stars in every known frequency. Soul sector cleansed. Indigenous species terminated. Moving to next harvest zone. That was all. To them, humanity was nothing. Just another primitive species to be erased. Just another mark on their list of conquests. Admiral Jesu arrived at Mars a week later with what remained of the fleet. 12 ships. Just 12 ships out of the hundreds that had once protected Earth. She looked old now, older than her years, as if the weight of all those deaths had pressed down on her body. "We need to hide," she told the survivors. "The aliens have left monitoring drones behind. If they detect any sign of rebuilding, they will return and finish the job. We need to scatter. Go to the outer colonies. Go to the asteroid belt. Go anywhere they won't think to look. And then what?" Someone asked. Jesu looked at Yuna. Yuna looked back. Something passed between them. An understanding. A promise. "Then we survive," Jesu said. "And we remember." The survivors scattered across the solar system like seeds blown by a terrible wind. They hid in ice caves on Europa. They dug into asteroids in the Kuiper Belt. They lived in darkness and fear, always watching the sky, always waiting for the aliens to return. But they did not die. Yuna stood on the surface of a small moon near Neptune, looking up at the distant stars. Somewhere out there, the aliens were moving on to their next conquest, already forgetting about the small blue planet they had burned. She picked up a piece of metal from a crash probe and scratched words into the ice at her feet. "We are still here." She did not know if anyone would ever read those words. She did not know if humanity would survive another year. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was not over. They thought they had ended humanity. They thought the fire had killed everything. They were wrong. 5 years had passed since the fall. Yuna was no longer a captain. The survivors had given her a new title, Commander. She did not want it. She had never wanted to lead. But when you are one of the few who can keep people alive, you do not get to choose. The hidden base on Europa was cold. It was always cold. The ice walls pressed in from every side, and the only heat came from small generators that they had to keep running day and night. But it was safe. The aliens had never thought to look here in the frozen ocean moon of Jupiter. 2 million people. That was all that remained of humanity. 2 million scattered across the solar system, hiding in holes and shadows like rats. But rats could bite. Dr. Hyan arrived at the Europa base on a stolen cargo ship. She was thin and tired, with dark circles under her eyes. She had been living on a research station near Neptune for 5 years, studying every piece of alien technology she could find. Now she had come with news. "I found something," she told Yuna. "Something important." They sat in Yuna's small office. The walls were bare metal. A single photograph hung on the wall. So, before the fall. Yuna looked at it every morning to remind herself what they had lost. "The aliens," Dr. Hyan said. "They call themselves the Vaughn. Their technology is not like ours. It is not metal and wire. It is alive." Yuna leaned forward. "Alive? Their ships, their weapons, their drones, everything is made from organic material. Living tissue. It grows. It heals. It thinks." Dr. Hyan pulled out a small container. Inside was a piece of dark flesh, still moving slightly. "I cut this from a crashed drone. It took me 3 years to understand what I was seeing." Yuna looked at the flesh with disgust. "So their ships are animals?" "More than that. They are all connected. Every Valen ship, every weapon, every drone is part of one giant organism spread across their entire empire. They call it the Overmind. It controls everything." Yuna understood immediately. If they are all connected, then they share weaknesses. Dr. Hyan smiled for the first time in years. Exactly. Organisms can get sick, Commander. They can catch diseases. They can be infected. On the other side of the solar system, a man named Dawan was leading a very different kind of fight. Dawan had been a farmer on Jeju Island before the fall. He had grown oranges and tomatoes and lived a simple life. Now he led a team of fighters who raided alien drone stations, stealing technology and killing anything that moved. His team called themselves the Embers. In Korean, they said it differently. Bulsi, the sparks that remain after a fire, the tiny flames that can start a new blaze. Tonight, they were attacking a monitoring station on Titan. The station was small, just a single building filled with organic machines that watched the solar system for signs of human activity. If they could destroy it, they would create a blind spot, a place where humans could move freely. Everyone ready? Dohan whispered into his radio. 6 voices answered yes. They moved through the orange fog of Titan's atmosphere, their suits protecting them from the deadly cold. The station was ahead, a dark shape against the darker sky. Dohan could see it pulsing slightly, like a heartbeat. Remember, he said, the walls are alive. Don't touch them unless you have to. They breached the door and rushed inside. The interior was warm and wet, like the inside of a body. Organic tubes ran along the walls, carrying fluids that glowed faintly. In the center of the room, a large mass of flesh controlled the entire station. Dohan raised his weapon and fired. The mass screamed, a sound that was not quite sound, more like a vibration in his bones. It died slowly, its flesh turning gray and still. Station is down, he reported. We have maybe an hour before they notice. His team worked fast. They cut samples from the walls. They downloaded data from the organic computers. They took everything they could carry. One of his fighters, a young woman named Sumi, stopped by a window. She was only 14 years old, born 2 years after the fall. She had never seen Earth. She had never seen a blue sky or felt rain on her face. Dohan, she said quietly, do you think we will ever go home? Dohan looked at her. She was too young for this life. They all were. Home is gone, Sumi, but we will build a new one. I promise. Back on Europa, Yuna called a meeting of all resistance leaders. It was done through encrypted signals, bounced off a dozen satellites to avoid detection. On her screen, she saw faces from across the solar system. Fighters, scientists, survivors, all waiting to hear what she had to say. Dr. Hyan has found a weapon, Yuna announced. The Valen are organic. Their entire empire is one connected organism. If we can create a disease that targets their biology, we can hurt them. Not just here, but everywhere. How long will it take? Someone asked. Dr. Hyan answered. Years, maybe decades. We need to study more samples. We need to understand their biology completely. One mistake and the disease will be useless. We have time, Yuna said. The Valen think we are dead. They are not watching us anymore. Every day they ignore us is a day we can use to prepare. Commander Dowan's voice came through the speakers. My team captured a Valen seed ship last month. It is small, meant to report any human activity. We did not destroy it. We are studying it. Perhaps it can help. Yuna nodded. Send everything you have to Dr. Hyan. Every piece of technology, every sample, every byte of data. We are building something, Dowan. Something the Valen have never seen before. What is that? Yuna looked at the photograph on her wall. So, her brother's face in her memory. The smell of smoke and ash. Revenge, she said. Slow, patient, and absolute. The meeting ended. The screens went dark. Yuna sat alone in the cold silence of Europa, surrounded by ice and stone. Somewhere out there, the Valen were conquering new worlds, killing new species, adding new names to their list of the dead. They had already forgotten about humanity. They had moved on. But humanity had not forgotten. In hidden bases across the solar system, scientists worked through the night. Soldiers trained in secret. Children learned to fight before they learned to read. The embers were glowing, and soon they would burn. 8 years after the fall, General Yuna stood in the deepest laboratory on Europa and watched death grow in a glass tube. The virus was beautiful in a terrible way. It glowed faintly green under the lights, moving through the liquid like smoke through air. Dr. Hyan had spent 3 years creating it. 3 years of failure and frustration and countless dead ends. But now it was ready. "We call it DOCOM," Dr. Hyan said. The Korean word for flu. It targets Valen organic tissue specifically. Nothing else. It spreads through their connected network like fire through dry grass. Yuna touched the glass with her fingertip. How fast? In laboratory conditions, it kills Valen tissue in 4 hours. In a living ship, maybe 8 to 12 hours. The important thing is that it spreads. Once it enters their network, it will jump from ship to ship, drone to drone, station to station. And the Overmind? Dr. Hyan's eyes grew dark. The Overmind is the heart of their entire system. If enough of its network dies, it will weaken. Maybe even collapse. Yuna turned away from the glass. Behind her, a team of soldiers waited for orders. They were the best humanity had left. Survivors. Fighters. People who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. Sergeant Taiwu was among them. He was not the scared young medic from the fall anymore. His face was hard now, marked by scars from a dozen battles. His eyes held a cold fire that never went out. "The first test will be on Titan," Yuna said. "There is a Valen monitoring station there that we have been watching for months. If the virus works, the station will die. If it does not work, we try again. And if they notice?" Taiwu asked. Yuna looked at him steadily. "Then they will come back to finish us. And we will die knowing we tried." Nobody argued. They all knew the risk. They had accepted it years ago. The mission to Titan was simple in design but deadly in execution. A small team would land near the station, breach its walls, and inject the virus directly into its central mass. The station would die. The team would escape. Simple. Nothing was ever simple. Taiwu led the team personally. He had volunteered without hesitation. When Yuna asked him why, he showed her a small photograph from his pocket. His mother, smiling in front of their home in Bizen. "She died on the first day," he said quietly. "I never got to say goodbye. I never got to tell her I loved her. This is the only way I know how to honor her memory." Yuna nodded. She understood. They all had ghosts pushing them forward. The drop to Titan was rough. The atmosphere was thick with orange fog, and the cold cut through their suits like knives. Taiwu could barely see 3 meters ahead as he led his team toward the station. "Contact in 200 meters," someone whispered over the radio. Taiwu raised his fist. The team stopped. Ahead, through the fog, he could see the station pulsing with that familiar sickly light. Alive. Waiting. "Move in," he ordered. They breached the outer wall with explosives. The station screamed, that horrible vibration that made Taiwu's teeth ache. Inside, organic tubes sprayed fluid as they were damaged. The walls tried to close around them, but the team was fast. They had trained for this moment for years. Taiwu reached the central mass. It was larger than he expected, a mountain of dark flesh that filled the entire core of the station. Eyes, hundreds of them, opened across its surface and stared at him. For a moment, he froze. The eyes were intelligent. They were looking at him, seeing him, understanding what he was about to do. "Humanity says hello," Taiwu whispered, and plunged a virus canister into the flesh. The reaction was immediate. The mass convulsed. The eyes widened, then began to cloud over. A sound like a dying animal filled the air, low and terrible and endless. "Move! Move!" Taiwu shouted. The team ran. Behind them, the station was dying. The walls collapsed. The tubes burst. Fluid poured across the floor like blood. They made it outside just as the entire structure crumbled into a pile of gray, rotting meat. "It works," Taiwu said into his radio. "The virus works." On Europa, Yuna closed her eyes and allowed herself one moment of hope. Just one. Then she opened them and began planning the next phase. The Valen Overmind was far away, 300 light years from Seoul, deep in the heart of their empire. But it was connected to everything. When the monitoring station on Titan went silent, it noticed. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Overmind felt something unexpected. The Sol system had been cleansed. This was confirmed. The primitive species there had been exterminated. All protocols had been followed. All reports had been submitted. And yet, something had just died in that system. Something had been killed. The Overmind reached out with its vast intelligence, trying to understand. It sent signals to its remaining drones in Seoul. Some answered. Others did not. The silence was wrong. It was impossible. The primitives were dead. The Overmind had seen them burn. It had watched their cities melt and their species die. There was nothing left. And yet, the Overmind issued new orders. A battle fleet, 200 ships strong, began to turn. They had been moving toward a new harvest, a new species to exterminate. Now they changed course. Back to Seoul, back to make sure. On Europa, Yuna received the news from a captured communications drone. The Valen were coming. 200 ships. More firepower than humanity had ever faced. "How long?" she asked. 2 years, Dr. Nyan said. "Maybe less." Yuna looked at the map of the solar system. 2 years to prepare. 2 years to build an army from nothing. 2 years to create weapons that could fight gods. It was not enough time. It would never be enough time. But it was all they had. "Begin production of the virus on every hidden base," Yuna ordered. "Start construction on the shipyards. Train every person who can hold a weapon. We have 2 years to do the impossible. And if we fail?" Someone asked. Yuna thought of Seoul. She thought of her brother. She thought of 7 billion people who had died believing that humanity would survive. "Then we die fighting," she said. "But they will remember us. The entire galaxy will remember what happened here. We will teach them that humans do not go quietly. We do not surrender. We do not give up." She stood straight and tall, her voice rising with every word. "They thought they killed us. They were wrong. And when they return, we will show them exactly what that mistake cost them." The room was silent. Then, one by one, fists rose into the air. The war was coming. And humanity was ready. The Valen fleet entered the solar system like a dark cloud swallowing the sun. 200 ships. Each one a living mountain of flesh and weapons, pulsing with the heartbeat of the Overmind. They moved in perfect formation, connected by invisible threads of thought, controlled by a single vast intelligence that had destroyed 1,000 worlds. General Yuna watched them approach from the bridge of the New Dawn, humanity's first true warship. It had taken 10 years to build in secret, using stolen technology and human ingenuity. It was smaller than the Valen ships, faster, and filled with the deadliest weapon ever created, the virus. "They are beautiful," Dr. Hyan said quietly, standing beside her. In a terrible way. They are dead, Yuna replied. They just don't know it yet. The plan was simple. Admiral Jisoo would lead a diversionary fleet to engage the Valen near Jupiter. She had 30 ships, old and battered, crewed by volunteers who knew they would not survive. While the Valen were focused on destroying them, strike teams would slip through the battle and inject the virus directly into the flagship. The flagship was special. It carried a piece of the Overmind itself, a massive brain that coordinated all Valen forces in the region. If they could kill it, the entire fleet would be thrown into chaos. Admiral Jisoo's face appeared on the screen. She was old now, her hair white, her face lined with decades of grief. But her eyes were sharp and clear. General, she said, my fleet is in position. Admiral. Yuna's voice caught slightly. Jisoo, you don't have to do this. We can find another way. Jisoo smiled, a sad and gentle smile. There is no other way. You know that. I have been waiting 10 years for this moment. 10 years of hiding. 10 years of watching our people suffer. Let me do this, Yuna. Let me give them something to remember. Yuna bowed her head. It has been an honor, Admiral. The honor was mine. Jisoo's image flickered. Tell the children about us. Tell them we held the line. And finish this. The screen went dark. The Battle of Jupiter began with fire. Admiral Jisoo's fleet charged directly at the Valen Armada, weapons blazing. The old ships were slow and weak compared to the alien vessels, but their crews fought with a fury that surprised even the Overmind. They did not retreat. They did not surrender. They flew straight into the enemy and died with their fingers on the triggers. Yuna watched on the long-range sensors as ship after ship vanished from the screen. Each light that went out was 100 souls, friends, comrades, heroes. Admiral Jisoo's ship is gone, someone reported quietly. Yuna closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she opened them. Launch the strike teams. 12 small craft slipped away from the new dawn, flying low and fast through the chaos of battle. Each one carried a pilot and a canister of Dr. Hyan's virus. Their mission was simple: reach the flagship and deliver the payload. Nothing else mattered. Sumi flew one of those craft. She was 19 now, no longer the frightened child who had asked Do-won if they would ever go home. She had trained for this mission her entire life. She had memorized every system on the Valen ships. She knew exactly where to strike. Strike Team 7, entering the combat zone, she reported. The battle was everywhere. Explosions lit up the darkness of space like new stars being born. Debris from destroyed ships spun past her cockpit. She flew through a cloud of frozen blood, the remains of some massive Valen creature torn apart by human weapons. I see the flagship, she said. Beginning approach. The flagship was enormous, 10 times larger than any other Valen ship. Its surface was covered with eyes and mouths and things that had no name. At its heart, a brain the size of a city pulsed with alien thought. Sumi flew toward it. Valen fighters appeared around her, fast and deadly. She dodged and weaved, her small craft dancing through their fire. One by one, the other strike craft were destroyed. She watched their lights go out on her screen, but she did not stop. She could not stop. I'm hit, she shouted. Her ship shuddered. Smoke filled the cockpit. Warning lights flashed everywhere. The engines were dying. She had seconds left. Sumi looked at the flagship ahead of her. She looked at the virus canister strapped to her chest. She made her choice. General Yuna, she said into her radio, I'm not going to make it back. Tell Do-won I kept my promise. Tell him I found my way home. Then she pointed her dying ship at the flagship and flew directly into its flesh. The impact tore through the outer skin of the alien vessel. Sumi's body was crushed instantly, but her hand was still on the canister. The virus spilled into the living tissue of the flagship, spreading, multiplying, killing. On the bridge of the New Dawn, Yuna watched the flagship begin to change. The eyes across its surface clouded over. The mouths stopped moving. The pulsing heartbeat slowed, stuttered, and stopped. Gray patches spread across its skin like mold on fruit, the virus eating through its cells with terrible speed. And then, something amazing happened. The other Valen ships began to falter. Without the Overmind fragment to coordinate them, they lost their perfect formation. They collided with each other. They fired on their own allies. They drifted aimlessly through space like blind animals. The virus is spreading through their network, Dr. Hyan reported. Ship after ship is dying. The infection is moving faster than we predicted. Yuna watched the Valen fleet tear itself apart. 200 ships, the greatest force in the galaxy, reduced to rotting meat floating in the darkness. She opened a channel to the surviving Valen vessels, the few that had somehow resisted the plague. "This is General Yuna of the Human Remnant," she said. "You came to confirm our extinction. Instead, you will carry a message home." She paused, letting the words sink in. "We remember, and we are coming." The surviving Valen ships fled. They jumped to hyperspace and ran, carrying the virus with them, carrying the message, carrying the fear. On the New Dawn, the crew was silent. They had won. After 10 years of hiding, 10 years of suffering, 10 years of loss, they had finally won. But the cost was terrible. Admiral Jizu was dead. Sumi was dead. Thousands of others were dead. The victory tasted like ash in Yuna's mouth. Dr. Hyan touched her shoulder gently. "They didn't die for nothing," she said. "The Valen will never forget this day. The entire galaxy will know what happened here." Yuna nodded slowly. She looked out at the drifting corpses of the Valen fleet, mountains of dead flesh floating among the stars. "This is not the end," she said quietly. "This is just the beginning." Somewhere far away, the Overmind received the message from its fleeing ships. For the first time in its ancient existence, it felt something it did not understand. Fear. The primitives were not dead. They had struck back. They had wounded the greatest power in the galaxy. And they were coming. 15 years after the fall, Fleet Admiral Yuna stood on the bridge of the New Dawn and watched the Valen homeworld grow larger in the viewport. Behind her, 500 human warships waited in formation. They had traveled across the stars, through systems that had never seen human faces, past worlds that had been conquered and enslaved by the Valen for thousands of years. Now they were here, at the heart of the enemy empire, ready to end it all. Dr. Hyan stood beside her, older now but still sharp. "The Overmind is weak," she said. "The virus has been spreading through their empire for 5 years. Entire fleets have died. Entire worlds have gone silent. What remains is a shadow of what they once were. And yet they still fight," Yuna replied. "They have no choice. The Overmind controls them. They cannot surrender even if they wanted to." Minho, Yuna's young nephew, stepped forward. He was 23 years old, born after the fall, raised in bunkers and hidden colonies. He had never seen Earth, but he had heard the stories. Now he served as a diplomat, trying to find peaceful solutions even in the middle of war. "Admiral," he said carefully, "we could end them, completely. The virus is still spreading. If we do nothing, the Valen will be extinct within a decade." Yuna looked at him. "Is that what you want?" Minho hesitated. "They killed 8 billion of us. They burned our world. They tried to erase us from existence. Yes, they did." Yuna turned back to the viewport. "And now we have a choice. We can become them. We can wipe them out, species by species, world by world, until nothing remains. Or we can be something different. What do you mean? Yuna smiled slightly. Dr. Hyan, is the modified virus ready? Dr. Han nodded. We call it liberation. Instead of killing Valen tissue, it severs the connection to the overmind. Any Valen exposed to it will become an individual. They will think for themselves, feel for themselves, choose for themselves. The overmind will lose control forever. Minho's eyes widened. You're going to free them? We're going to give them what the overmind took from them, Yuna said. Choice, freedom, the chance to be more than slaves to a hive mind. The battle for the Valen homeworld was fierce but short. The overmind threw everything it had at the human fleet. Ships that were barely functional, crews that were dying from the virus, weapons that misfired and failed. It was desperate, terrified, fighting for its existence. The human ships cut through them like fire through paper. Yuna led the final assault personally. The new dawn dove through the atmosphere of the Valen homeworld, heading for the great structure at its center, the physical body of the overmind itself. It was enormous. A mountain of living flesh that covered half a continent, pulsing with the thoughts of 1 billion connected minds. Eyes the size of cities watched them approach. Mouths that could swallow ships opened and closed in silent rage. Deploy the liberation virus, Yuna ordered. Thousands of canisters fell from the human ships, spreading the modified virus across the planet. It seeped into the flesh of the overmind. It spread through its veins. It reached every connected Valen on the surface. And then something amazing happened. The overmind screamed, not with sound, but with thought. A wave of pure psychic agony swept across the planet, across the stars, across the entire Valen Empire. It was the scream of something dying, something that had lived for 1 million years finally coming to an end. And then silence. On the surface of the homeworld, Valen began to wake up. For the first time in their existence, they had their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own choices. They looked at each other with confusion, with fear, with wonder. They were free. Yuna landed on the surface an hour later. She walked through the remains of the overmind, stepping over rotting flesh and dying tissue. At its very center, she found what she was looking for, a small chamber, still alive, where the last ember of the collective consciousness flickered. She looked at it for a long moment. You thought you understood us, she said quietly. You watched our cities burn and our people die, and you thought we were finished, broken, done. The ember pulsed weakly, unable to respond. You forgot what people are, Yuna continued. We don't just survive. We adapt, we overcome. We carry our dead with us, and we build something new from the ashes. You could have killed every single human being, and somehow, somewhere, we would have found a way to come back. She turned and walked away. Behind her, the ember flickered one last time and went dark. The overmind was dead. 1 year later, Yuna stood in the rebuilt streets of Seoul. It had taken enormous effort to terraform Earth again, to clean the air and restore the oceans and make the planet livable. But humans had done it, with help from the species they had liberated along the way. 43 different alien races now lived in peace with humanity, grateful to the people who had freed them from the Valen. A memorial stood in the center of the city. A wall of names stretched for kilometers, listing every human who had died in the fall. 8 billion names. 8 billion lives remembered forever. Beside the wall, a single flame burned eternally. Minho stood with his aunt, looking at the flame. Beside them was a young Valen, one of the first generation born free. It looked at the memorial with something like sadness in its eyes. I am sorry, it said slowly, still learning human speech, for what my people did to yours. Yuna shook her head. Your people did nothing. The overmind did. You were slaves, just like the others. What matters now is what we build together. A group of children ran past, laughing and playing. Human children. Valan children. Other species that had no names in any human language. They did not care about the past. They only cared about the game they were playing. "Admiral," Minho said, "why did we spare them? After everything?" Yuna watched the children play. "Because revenge is easy," she said. "Building something better is hard. We could have become conquerors, just like them. We could have burned their worlds and exterminated their species. But that is not what people are. Then what are we?" Yuna smiled. It was a real smile, warm and genuine, the first she had felt in 15 years. "We are the ones who come back," she said. "Not just to survive, not just to win, but to make sure no one else has to suffer what we suffered. That is what people really are. We turn our pain into purpose. We turn our losses into lessons. We take the worst thing that ever happened to us and we use it to build something beautiful." She looked up at the sky. Somewhere out there, among the stars, the Sol Alliance was growing. 200 systems, 43 species, billions of lives, all living in peace because humanity had chosen mercy over vengeance. "They thought it was over," she said softly. "They thought when they burned our world, they had ended us." She put her hand on Minho's shoulder. "They forgot that endings are just beginnings in disguise." Above them, the flame burned on. It would burn forever, a reminder of what was lost and what was gained. A promise to the dead and a gift to the living. Humanity had fallen. Humanity had risen. And the stars themselves would remember their name.